and I write programs. And that's why that's part of the reason I started doing program reviews on YouTube.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of the things we talk about is you can feel when a program has been done. And,
Right.
A coach that turns online trainer is a big difference than in comparison to your online coach who just sees the influencer making money and tries to replicate that. And that mimicry is what leaves room for charlatans, and I think there are a lot of people that are just good at selling, but not good at programming. But what were you going to say? Did I cut you off?
No, you weren't.
Okay.
I was just agreeing with you. I mean, there's the marketing aspect of it, and sometimes that overshadows the real value that, the marketing is better and they can sell you something that doesn't have quality behind it. I was curious. It's the first thing that popped in my mind when you said that you started early on with the conjugate method and Louis Simmons and T Nation articles and all those things. Looking back and thinking about sometimes when we do the programming early on or we find a new influence, we'll just follow the programs blindly. Was there anything looking back now or the knowledge that you have now? Have you ever seen anything wrong looking at the conjugate method? Is something missing? Is it, what things are you looking at now with the knowledge that you have now that you would have added back then?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there's a few things. Number one, there's not enough emphasis on the aerobic system. And that was the thing for me as an athlete, I was always most limited with. And I'm sure you remember back in the day, it was if you run more than 3 minutes, you are getting slower, weaker, and fatter. And there was a huge disconnect with energy systems and how, physiologically that these things actually work. And that for me was area of low hanging fruit and something that I didn't learn, some years later. I think it was 2014, 2015 that I started to really go down the rabbit hole of the aerobic system. And, there's just so many things that happen that take place from a physiological perspective when you do some steady state cyclical work that has the ability to just have just a cascade of effects. So that to me was just an area of unknown, right? We knew it was there. And I even remember Joe talking about it. He's like, he was going through one of his videos was like his top books. And I remember in that book, which is high performance, I'm looking at high performance training for sports. And he mentioned Joel Jamieson. And that was probably the first time I heard about Joel Jamieson. And it wasn't until, a few years later that a local coach that I knew, was having a lot of results with the athletes he was working with. And I'm saying, hey, what are you doing that I'm not doing? And he said, well, we're doing zone 2 work. And this is before the zone 2 craze. I mean, everyone now knows about zone 2 work. I think a lot of people know about it, have some familiarity with it, but they don't actually know what it is or what it does. So that was for me, I opened up Ultimate MMA Conditioning. I read that book and my mind was blown. And I said, okay, I'm not doing any of this. I mean, we pull sleds, but not for longer than 20 minutes. I mean, it was, we would do sets of 60 to 100 yards, that type of thing with heavier loads. But needless to say, there's no real aerobic development. And even the times that we were doing longer duration work, it was, not in the correct ranges with the right modalities. So that for me was probably the biggest piece of the puzzle that I think without that, I don't know how things would have went. I don't know if I'd be sitting here right now talking to you because that for me was the biggest piece of the puzzle that was always just kind of missing. And I think there were other little nuances to conjugate that, we can certainly talk about. I think there's a lot to be said about some of the methods, whether or not they're the right fit for the right people at the right time. But if I had to just kind of pick one piece, that would be it.
Yeah, I do notice that you spend a lot of time on Instagram posting about cardiovascular health and zone 2 stuff. Can you give us sort of like a quick synopsis of what zone 2 is and a quick way to develop it if some of our listeners are trying to add that into their programming?
Sure. Yeah. So by definition, zone 2 is 60 to 70% of max heart rate. So if you're using a basic, 220 minus your age, you would go off of that. And the problem with it is that most people do it and it's too easy, right? We're so conditioned to think that we have to go harder and harder and do more and more to get more. And in reality, it doesn't work that way. There is a point of diminishing returns. We can't just do, if we just could do more to get more, then none of us would have a job. We've just had people just keep doing things and they would keep getting better, but we know that it doesn't work that way. So staying in that range has a number of benefits in terms of just cardiovascular health and things like cardiac output. And, not to get overly complex, but cardiac output is a product of heart rate and stroke volume. So essentially what that means is you have ability to pump more blood to working extremities in less time. So if you're able to pump more blood, obviously you have the component of work capacity built into that. We also have things like cavity volume, specifically in the left ventricle of the heart. And a lot of times people say, well, I'll just lift weights, right? I'll just lift weights faster and I'll get the same adaptations. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The difference is in terms of thickening versus stretching. So if we think about just lifting weights, we get more thickening of the left ventricle. If we think about more stroke volume or more cavity volume, we get more eccentric, so more kind of opening up, if you will. And that happens in very specific scenarios. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to do kettlebell complexes or I'm going to do burpees or whatever. It comes by way of doing things that are more sustainable. Because when we do things that are more sustainable, like go on a Stairmaster for 30 minutes, pedal a bike for 30 minutes, go on maybe a hike or a ruck with a light load for 60, 90 minutes, you get not only is the sustainability there, but you're also keeping things like blood pressure lower. And by keeping blood pressure lower, we ensure that we're getting the same amount of dilation. It's not constricting. Isometric contractions will increase blood pressure, which will in turn reduce the amount of adaptations that we're going to achieve specifically in the heart. So when you think about all of these things in terms of duration, in terms of heart rate, in terms of modality, they need to be intact for you to really arrive at what we want to arrive at, which is better work capacity. And of course, you tie that into things like VO2 max, which we know, if you look at the literature, like VO2 max is highly related to all-cause mortality. So we can reduce someone's ability to incur any type of things like heart disease or simply just living longer. We know that there's strong correlations between someone's VO2 max and how long they live. So of course, I think that overall, if you make the argument that, well, if you do this work, you're going to live longer, that's probably at the forefront, right? But I think a lot of people are more connected to the here and now. Well, what is it going to do for me now? And your work capacity improves. Your ability to recover between strength sessions, your hypertrophy sessions, that stuff improves. So you have kind of, again, this cascade of effects where it's about how you're going to live for the next how many years, and also how you're going to improve your ability to get more from the training that maybe is most meaningful for you. Maybe you're more of a strength athlete, or maybe you're someone that's more concerned with the way you look. Those things can be improved by simply building a better foundation, which is the aerobic system. And the way we do that is we bias things like cyclical measures, things like an air bike, air run, or ski, or a step, whatever you have access to wherever you're training. Commercial gym, obviously you've got a lot of different options that you could potentially use to keep it interesting. But the trade-off is that, yes, it is relatively boring. It's not super sexy. It's definitely not going to get you likes on social media, but it will literally improve every aspect of your life. It'll improve your ability to tolerate stress, improve how long you live. It'll improve your work capacity. It'll improve strength and hypertrophy gains. It even will improve power. If you want to improve power, then having a better aerobic system is going to help you do that. And I think that if you're going to make a case for anything, that would be the thing for me that you can, in essence, add to your program and see it carry over right away and not have to worry about overtraining. That's the one thing that I think people ask, what can I add? Well, you can add more zone 2. You really can't overdo it. I think that, of course, if you're training for ultra distances and you're doing just an inordinate amount of road work or things like that, then of course we could get to a point where we could bleed into more strength and hypertrophy gains. But someone is going to need to do a lot of that to have that happen. You're talking 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a week, which I don't think anyone that has a responsibility is doing that much zone 2. I think most people, if you can get in the 2 to 3 hour range, that's a good place to be.
So if you're going to sit down and write a new West Side for Skinny Bastards for T Nation, what does that process look like? What's your food pyramid of training? Yep. Do you work backwards from what you're trying to accomplish. And I know obviously that's a factor in individualizing the program, but I'm thinking more if you're writing a program like that that's going to land on a website, are you just basically doing what would work best for you and then putting in the puzzle pieces after that? Or what's that brainstorming session look like?
Well, it all depends on, so like if we're going to use Westside for Skinny Bastards as the template, we would first figure out, well, what is the training split of that? So typical conjugate split. And I can't remember if Joe did it. I know he did some pump work at the end of the week, and there wasn't, I don't remember him leaning on dynamic effort training as much in that program, which would make sense because someone just doesn't have the motor control yet. You're talking about people that are still learning how to move well, which is another thing with conjugate that, again, sometimes gets lost in translation. So I would start with the base, the template of that program, and know what we're doing on what days. So let's say Monday is a heavy lower body session, and Tuesday is some GPP work, and Wednesday is a heavy upper body, and then Thursday some more GPP. And that, again, that could be your cyclical stuff. And then, of course, you can plug in if you wanted to do pump work at the end of the week where it's more higher repetition, more motor control work. That could take place for lower body on Friday and then upper body on Saturday. Now, if you wanted to condense that into the week, you certainly could too. So I think at the baseline level of writing a program, we need to think about what days we're doing what. What is the split of that program, and how do we potentially plug that in across a week? Now, if it's a 4-day-a-week program, then you make some concessions because you can't do it all, right? If someone's got 4 days to train, you're like, well, we're going to do Westside for Skinny Bastards. Maybe 4 days to train that's not the right program to try to align to a 4-day split, right? Because in that program, you do have 4 main strength sessions, which doesn't leave any room for much else. So I think at the core of it, again, the baseline of writing a program, we need to know what is the maximum amount of time someone can commit to that program. And then we start to reverse engineer from there.